This call may be monitored and recorded for quality assurance.
Okay, I just had a phone call with a client who has a Jackson 1085, which is a concealed vertical rod, narrow style crossbar exit device. Concealed vertical rod. Access control over the opening. And he told me that there's an electric strike. It's a pair of doors from what I could gather, and the active door has access control. Card reader, keypad, whatever it is. Electric strike up in the header, which are not common, but they do exist. And then a Jackson 1085, actually one on both of the doors. Now, I was not able to capture the phone call, but in essence, it was the following. The client describes his 1085, that he's got an electric strike and it stopped working. And I said to him, well, that should never have worked at all. Is this a new installation? He says, no. How long? About 14 years. I says, wow, it should never have worked. And the reasoning is that it should never have worked is the bolt head of a Jackson 1085 is nothing other than think of a coupling nut. It's just a bolt head. And the way that the device would work, and I'll show you the instructions also, the way the device works is you hit the exit device, the rods are retracted, they're held retracted, or at least the top rod is held retracted, because the guide has a spring-loaded tab that when the device is hit, bolt comes down and it's locked in because that's spring biased. Okay? Door opens, door closes. When the door comes to close, it'll hit the trigger release. The trigger release forces this out and this up. That's fine. You can do all that with an electric strike, provided you've got room to mount the trigger release, which you wouldn't with an electric strike. The problem is this. You're locked. Access control credentials are presented. The circuit is either closed or opened, whether it's fail-safe or fail-secure. At that point, you should be able to just pull the door open, but because of the bolt head shape of the 1085, because it's not a latch, it's just a bolt, you're not going to get that keeper to move or open up on you. And as I described all that to the client, all the bells are ringing in his head. He's seeing it. He repeated back to me, okay, so explain to me what I need to do. And I said, okay, we discussed the anatomy of the top bolt guide that has the trigger, the retainer. We have the trigger release. I explained how that all works. He then repeated all of that to me, and I said, perfect. That's exactly mechanically how it will work. The problem, however, is that you got a bolt head. I said, at a very minimum, you'd want to try to taper that bolt head so that it would actually be more curved, more like the nature of my fist, so that it will work. So while it would have been more helpful to hear the conversation, that was the gist of it. I'll switch to the screen view and just show you the installation instructions in terms of what we're talking about on the 1085, and who knows what's up there. There could be, Adams Wright has a double trigger sort of style that's really good for reducing preload on a door. It could be that, and that could work. So depending on the shape of his latch, it might be okay. Let's switch to the screen view and let's take a look at this information I'm talking about. If you've not hit subscribe yet, we would very much appreciate if you did, and hopefully you're enjoying this video. Now, let's get back to it. Okay, so first, let's take a look at the Jackson 1085, and we'll pull up installation instructions for it, and we'll take a look at what that means regarding compatibility. So a 1085 is a concealed vertical rod. It's not a rim device. The rods are on the interior of the style of the aluminum door, generally aluminum doors. I've never seen it installed on anything but aluminum. Definitely not practical to try to install this on any other door composition. So parts list here, important to note, trip bracket. This piece is mentioned. Top guide is also mentioned, and I'm going to show that to you. Here it is. Bolt guide. Well, it's a bolt guide. Now what's really interesting about that is this is the top. This is what is spring biased. This is what's retaining the bolt. When you hit the crossbar, bolt's going to be held retracted until the door comes closed. This tang will make contact with the trip bracket package here. That's what will force the bolt to relock. That all works really well. Let's take a look at the bolt itself. Not a great picture of it anywhere here, except that it will look like this. But let's look at it in the instructions. That's your bottom bolt guide. That's a great picture of the bottom. The top's going to look just like this. The fact that it has this little doodad feature here is probably why it's worked for as long as it has. But you'll note the bottom bolt guide does not have that trip release. That's here. That bolt goes through this trip release. This is what will be pushed by the trip bracket, the set screw hanging off the trip bracket. And I'm scrolling to find a better picture of the bolt at the top. There should be something here. Yeah, right here. Yeah, so that's it. That's it. That's what it looks like. So if it had worked at all, which it obviously did, then good for the client. But this is the page that needs to really be focused on. This is the page. Bolt's going to be extended here. It's in the locked position. You need the top bracket required to trigger. Top guide with trip release slide. Note, check trip release for free movement after installation. Yeah, it has to move, or the device won't operate. And right here is a cross section of what it needs to look like. So if the client installed an electric strike, which is going to hang out right in this area, there may not be a trip bracket here. The fact of the matter is, I just don't see how it ever worked. Well, sure, I see how it worked. The problem is if they've used a bottom guide that doesn't have the retractor, the trip release slide, that bolt's always going to be sticking out. What's interesting about this is that, and the client said in the conversation that they had disabled the bottom rod. That makes sense because that would always be hanging down. They would have had to have removed that. So this is a Hackmaster amateur job. Actually, in the pantheon of Hackmasters, this will be our winner for best picture of the year. You know, so really what's interesting is, how is it even coming to the closed position? You know, the bolt, maybe they modified the bolt, but this kind of stair-step profile, maybe it's just working. And they probably have the closer cranked up so high that it's really pulling the door closed, or the spring so compressed. Now, I also had mentioned electric strikes that are used for vertical rod devices. Well, let's take a look. Fulgeratum is the name of the company that comes to mind for me all the time for these. Other people make them, but Fulgeratum's just the one I always think of. I'm going to look at an older product catalog. Yeah, right here, the 300 series. For single doors, double doors, obviously. A 310 series. Rim exit devices, surface vertical rod devices having a swinging Pullman-style latch bolt. Concealed vertical rods having a 1/2 or 5/8 throw latch bolt. That's key. So their strike could look something like this. But you'll notice that when I continued scrolling, you didn't see any that were for concealed vertical rod bolts. That's because I don't believe there is one. Now, I had mentioned Adams Wright and their preload model. Let me show that to you. It works really well, and it could probably be forced to work in this application. Let's pull up the catalog. I wish I had a photo of what was installed. It would be very enlightening. I don't remember the part number of that electric strike. Could be a 7200. Well, it's not. I know I did a video on this preload model. There's a couple of triggers. Yeah, 7400. I don't see why this wouldn't be a problem to work in terms of releasing, but it's just not going to work when the bolt comes to present itself. The bolt's extended because they altered the top guide assembly. It's not holding the bolt retracted. Now, what I would probably do is just get the trip release installed, the thing that would go in the header, change the top guide, hold the bolt retracted until it hits the trip release, and then have it seat into this type of strike. Because when this releases, you'll be able to take your finger and just push and it will exit. They're going to close. So what could be done? Let's take a look. It's really tricky business to get this to work, in the sense that if you use access control and the strike releases and pulls the door open, when the door closer goes to bring the door to the closed position, it's still not going to work. So it's certainly possible that the shape of the bolt works, but access control, strike releases, somehow you're able to pull the door open, and somehow the closer is able to get the door to close because the bolt's extended. And I bet that they have it extended so very little, it's probably not projecting off the top of the door very much at all. Probably a major security issue. Normal mechanical operation still would not. Well, if it works in the access control scenario, it will probably work in manual control, meaning you can hit the device and exit. It'll retract the bolt until you let the crossbar go, but now the bolt's extended again. Same problem, comes close. So they really must have modified a lot more. They must have just did anything possible to get this thing to work, to get paid, to then get in their car and not look in their rearview mirror, would be my guess. Now, what would I do in this situation? Well, what I would do is I would look to get the proper hardware installed. There are things that can be done. Obviously, changing the exit device to a device that's going to have the proper top latch assembly, meaning a latch and not a bolt. So for the Doramatic 1690 series, you can do a latch assembly. And the 1690 just comes to mind because it's the last one that I did, basically. And let's look. Yeah, okay. So the 1990 is the one that I want. So in a 1990, which is going to be kissing cousins to a 1085, it comes with a latch. You'll recall that there was no latch assembly offered for the 1085 Jackson. Now there may be now, but I'm just looking at the data that I have in front of me. So what I would be doing is going to the client saying, we need to change, we need to get here is what we need. This is going to work with an exit device every time because this is the face of the latch that's going to encounter the keeper of the strike. So I would be looking to change the exit device to this sort of situation. If that wasn't possible and you still needed access control, you're talking about a device change. There's no way to give you access control reliably with that 1085. Yeah, I'm coming up empty-handed on another solution. I'd be happy to hear any solution that you might have, but you want to get to a latch, and then you'd have to inspect the strike. A maglock's not going to work. It's not going to be code compliant, most likely, if exit devices are already installed. It could also be that exit devices are not required. It could be that you could add a mullion and then a rim exit, or I should say a mullion and 2 rim exits. In fact, it would be far more secure because one thing that these tricksters do on a 1085 Jackson, on a pair of them, it's really, really, really common for a customer to call me and say, yeah, they're getting in. I've got a pair of doors, Jackson 1085s, and they're getting in. How are they doing that? I know how they're doing that. But I say to the client, how are they doing that? They say they're sticking a coat hanger between the doors and pulling the crossbar in. The way to defeat that attack is to add a mullion. A mullion is a weird word for a way to defeat that. So let's take a look at a couple of aluminum jams here, crossbars. Coat hanger comes in, grabs that, pulls it, you're in. Now, same scenario, but now add a steel or aluminum tube here. Okay? That defeats that attack. Then you have to change it to a rim exit device and have the mullion prepped for the electric strike. That's a really good option because the rim exit device is going to have a latch. If it's a rim device, they're not, all rim devices are not Pullman latches, but you would select one that's a Pullman latch, which is the vast majority of them, and that's what would actually solve that. And one, you'll solve any sort of surreptitious bypass. B, 2, you'll dramatically increase the security over the opening. C, or 3, you'll have a much more reliable means of access control as well. Okay. That would be probably what I'm thinking on that. Okay, I hope this was of some help, and we'll add to it if the opportunity presents itself. Thank you. Thank you for watching, and if you've enjoyed this video, please click thumbs up, please subscribe, and maybe even send the video to someone that you know. Thank you.